Commander Lee Hyun adjusted his uniform as he walked through the corridors of the Terran Children's Sanctuary. The massive orbital station floated silently in the darkness of space, far from any planet or war zone. Here, 50,000 children lived safely under the protection of galactic law. These were not just any children. They were orphans from across human space, survivors of accidents, disasters, and the cruel realities of life among the stars. The station buzzed with life and laughter. In the main recreation hall, children of all ages played together. Some kicked balls across the zero-gravity courts while others painted pictures on digital canvases. The youngest ones, barely 5 years old, chased each other through the soft-walled play areas. Their giggles echoed through the corridors, bringing smiles to the faces of the staff who cared for them. Lee Hyun paused at one of the large viewing windows. Beyond the reinforced glass, the stars twinkled like distant diamonds. This place was supposed to be the safest location in known space. The Galactic Council had declared it neutral territory. No military force from any species was allowed to approach within 50 light minutes of the station. Even the most aggressive alien races respected this rule. "Commander," called Lieutenant Park Min from the communications center. "We have another supply ship requesting docking permission. It's the weekly food delivery from Earth." Lee Hyun nodded and walked over to check the manifest. Rice, vegetables, fruits, and special treats for the children. Everything looked normal. The supply ships came like clockwork every week, bringing not just food but also toys, books, and letters from sponsors across human space. Many people on Earth and the colonies had adopted children from the sanctuary, even if they could never meet them in person. Captain Kim Soo stood near the main observation deck, watching a group of 10-year-olds learn basic mathematics from their teacher. Kim had been stationed here for 3 years and loved every moment of it. Unlike his previous assignments on warships and military bases, this place felt pure. Here his job was not to fight enemies but to protect innocence itself. "Look at them," Kim said to Lee as he approached. "Yesterday little Anna drew me a picture of her dream house. She wants a garden where she can grow flowers." These kids still believe in beauty despite everything they've lost. The children came from many different backgrounds. Some had lost their parents in space accidents when cargo ships malfunctioned or when colonies faced natural disasters. Others were survivors of pirate attacks on remote settlements. A few had been found drifting in escape pods after their ships suffered catastrophic failures. Despite their tragic pasts, the children remained hopeful and full of life. The sanctuary provided them with education, medical care, and most importantly, love. The staff included teachers, doctors, counselors, and security personnel who had all volunteered for this assignment. They could have been stationed anywhere in human space, but they chose to be here, caring for the most vulnerable members of their species. Dr. Yoon Sarah, the station's chief medical officer, often said that working here reminded her why humanity was worth protecting. The children represented the future, unburdened by the prejudices and conflicts that plagued adult society. They played together regardless of which colony they came from or what their parents had believed. To them, friendship was simple and pure. The sanctuary operated on a strict schedule. Morning classes covered basic subjects like reading, writing, and arithmetic. Afternoons were for physical activities and creative projects. Evenings meant story time, when volunteers would read tales from Earth's ancient cultures or exciting adventures from the space colonies. The children especially loved stories about brave explorers discovering new worlds and making friends with alien creatures. Lieutenant Park Min was monitoring the long-range sensors when something unusual appeared on his screen. Multiple ship signatures were approaching at high speed. This was strange because all scheduled arrivals were supposed to be announced days in advance. He adjusted the controls and tried to get a clearer reading. "Commander," Park called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I'm picking up a large fleet approaching our position. They're not responding to our identification requests." Lee Hyun frowned and walked quickly to the sensor station. The approaching ships were massive, much larger than typical cargo vessels or passenger transports. Their design was angular and aggressive, nothing like the smooth curves of human spacecraft. As the fleet drew closer, the sensors revealed their true nature. These were warships from the Kethvar Confederation. The Kethvar were a militant alien race known for their ruthless tactics and expansionist policies. They had been pushing against human territory for months, but always within the bounds of galactic law. They had never directly attacked civilian targets, and certainly never approached neutral zones like the sanctuary. "Try to establish communication," Lee ordered. "Remind them that this is protected space under Galactic Council jurisdiction." Park transmitted the standard warnings and identification protocols. The response came back immediately, but not through normal communication channels. Instead, crimson energy beams lanced out from the lead Kethvar vessels, striking the sanctuary's outer hull with devastating force. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the station. Hull breaches were reported on multiple levels. The children's screams mixed with the wailing sirens as sections of the sanctuary began to decompress. Staff members rushed to implement emergency procedures, sealing blast doors and activating backup life support systems. Lee Hyun grabbed the station-wide communication system. His final transmission would be heard across human space, carried by emergency beacons to every human colony and outpost. "They're targeting the children. They're targeting the children." The massacre was swift and merciless. Within minutes, the Terran Children's Sanctuary was nothing but expanding debris and extinguished dreams. 50,000 innocent lives had been snuffed out while the galaxy watched in stunned horror. Admiral Choi Jun sat in his command chair on Mars Central Command, staring at the screens that showed nothing but empty space where the sanctuary had been. The footage had arrived just 20 minutes ago through emergency channels. Every human military base, every colony, every ship in space had received the same horrific transmission. Lee Hyun's final words still echoed in the Admiral's mind. The command center was completely silent. Officers who had served in battles across the galaxy stood motionless, their faces pale with shock. Many of them had sponsored children at the sanctuary. Major Yoon Hae had been sending letters to a 7-year-old girl named Lisa for 2 years. Captain Park Do had planned to adopt twin brothers when his tour of duty ended. Now those children were gone, reduced to atoms in the cold vacuum of space. "Sir," Major Yoon Hae said in a voice barely above a whisper. "The Kethvar are broadcasting across their territories. They're celebrating." Choi Jun closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had fought in 3 wars during his career. He had seen soldiers die, planets bombed, and cities destroyed. But this was different. Those had been military targets, enemy combatants, strategic locations. The sanctuary had been full of children who had never hurt anyone, who had already suffered too much in their short lives. The celebration broadcasts from Kethvar space were being translated and distributed throughout human territory. Kethvar military leaders boasted about their glorious victory over human weakness. They claimed that humans were making the galaxy soft with their sentiment and foolish mercy. The attack on the sanctuary was meant to teach humanity that kindness was a liability in a hostile universe. Across human space, people gathered around communication screens in their homes, offices, and public squares. Parents held their own children closer as they watched the news reports. The images of the sanctuary's destruction played over and over, each viewing making the reality more painful and more real. On Earth, Dr. Song Woo received an urgent message from the Global Defense Council. As the leading expert on human military history, he was being summoned to retrieve certain classified documents from deep storage. These were files that had been sealed away for 3 centuries, locked in secured vaults beneath the mountains of Tibet. The documents contained knowledge that humanity had promised never to use again. Song Woo took a transport to the storage facility, passing through multiple security checkpoints. The guards who accompanied him were unusually quiet. Everyone knew why he was there and everyone understood what it meant. At the deepest level of the complex, behind walls of reinforced metal and energy shields, sat archives that had not been opened since humanity joined the galactic community. The files contained detailed studies of something called total war, a concept that most alien species had never encountered. While other races fought for territory, resources, or honor, humans had once fought for complete destruction of their enemies. These documents described tactics and strategies that went beyond mere victory. They outlined methods for systematically destroying an opponent's ability to continue existing as an organized society. Emergency councils convened on every human world. Representatives from colonies that had never agreed on anything before now spoke with one voice. The discussions were brief and decisive. There would be no lengthy debates about appropriate responses or diplomatic solutions. The Kethvar had made their choice when they targeted defenseless children. President Nam Suk addressed all of humanity from the Capitol building on Earth. His speech was broadcast to every human settlement in known space. The man who had spent his career advocating for peace and cooperation now spoke with barely controlled rage burning in his eyes. "For centuries we have chosen restraint," Nam Suk said, his voice steady but filled with fury. "We have followed galactic law, respected neutral zones, and protected civilian targets even when our enemies did not. We believed that mercy was a sign of strength, that compassion made us better than those who would destroy the innocent. He paused, looking directly into the camera as if he could see every human watching across the galaxy. The Kethvar have shown us what they think of our mercy. They have taught us that our restraint was viewed as weakness. They celebrated the murder of our children. They have chosen to awaken something that we had put to sleep. The galaxy expected immediate military action. Alien observers prepared for the standard human response: careful, measured retaliation against military targets with maximum effort to avoid civilian casualties. That was how humans had always fought their wars since joining the galactic community. Clean, precise, and limited in scope. Instead, something strange happened. Human space went quiet. No fleets launched immediate attacks. No angry demands were sent to the Galactic Council. No threats were broadcast to Kethvar territories. The silence was more frightening than any declaration of war could have been. In secure military facilities across human space, officers studied documents that their predecessors had hoped would never see daylight again. Ancient tactical manuals were downloaded to military computers. Strategies that had been theoretical exercises became operational plans. Resource allocation charts were updated to support a type of warfare that the current generation had never seen. The Kethvar leadership noticed the unusual quiet from human space and interpreted it as fear or indecision. They had expected angry threats and demands for justice. Instead, they received only silence. Some Kethvar military advisors suggested that perhaps the humans were finally learning proper respect for superior force. But in the deepest bunkers and most secure command centers throughout human territory, preparations were being made for something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The children of the sanctuary would be avenged, but not in any way that the Kethvar could imagine or prepare for. The time for restraint had ended. General Han Bin stood before the largest gathering of human military commanders in 300 years. Officers from every fleet, every colony, and every military installation had assembled through secure holographic links. The meeting was taking place in the deepest bunker on Luna, protected by layers of armor and defensive systems that could withstand planetary bombardment. The general's weathered face showed no emotion as he placed his palm on an ancient scanner. The device had not been activated since humanity first joined the galactic community. A series of heavy locks disengaged with mechanical clicks that echoed through the silent chamber. Inside the sealed container lay documents and data cores that contained knowledge from humanity's darkest period. Total War Protocol is now in effect, Han Bin announced, his voice carrying across the assembled commanders. All galactic treaties regarding warfare limitations are hereby suspended. Rules of engagement are reverted to pre-contact standards. There will be no neutral zones, no protected targets, and no mercy for those who have declared themselves our enemies. The commanders listened in absolute silence. Many had never heard of Total War Protocol. It existed only in classified historical records, studied by a few specialists who hoped it would remain theoretical forever. Now it was becoming reality. Captain Oh Young received her orders through encrypted channels while her battle group patrolled the outer regions of human space. Her mission was unlike anything she had trained for in her 20-year career. Instead of engaging enemy fleets in direct combat, she was to strike at 17 different Kethvar supply depots simultaneously across multiple star systems. The attacks began at exactly the same moment across a front that stretched thousands of light-years. Human forces had been quietly positioning themselves for weeks while the galaxy believed they were still in shock from the sanctuary's destruction. Now they struck with precision and coordination that stunned even veteran military analysts. Oh Young's squadron emerged from hyperspace at Supply Depot Gamma 7, a massive facility that provided food and equipment to 3 Kethvar military sectors. The facility's defenders expected a traditional challenge, perhaps a demand for surrender, or at least some warning before hostilities began. Instead, they found their communication arrays destroyed before they could send a distress signal. Target all storage facilities and manufacturing centers, Oh Young ordered. Leave nothing functional. Similar scenes played out across Kethvar territory. Commander Bei Jun led coordinated strikes against communication networks, cutting off entire star systems from contact with their military command. The Kethvar had built their empire on the assumption that wars were fought between fleets in empty space, with clear battle lines and honorable single engagements. They were unprepared for an enemy that struck everywhere at once, targeting not just military forces but the entire infrastructure that supported their civilization. Human forces attacked supply lines, communication relays, industrial facilities, and resource extraction operations with ruthless efficiency. Kethvar Admiral Zekthal tried desperately to coordinate a response from his flagship, but half his fleet commanders were no longer responding to communications. The humans had somehow infiltrated their networks and were broadcasting false orders that sent Kethvar ships to empty systems while their real targets burned undefended. This isn't how civilized species conduct war, Zekthal protested over emergency channels to anyone who would listen. There are rules, protocols, agreements between honorable military forces. You cannot simply attack civilian infrastructure and industrial targets without warning. The response came from Colonel Shin Yun, whose voice was broadcast not just to Kethvar forces but across the entire galaxy through hijacked communication networks. Every species monitoring galactic communications heard her words clearly: "You forfeited the right to civilized warfare when you murdered our children." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Kethvar military morale collapsed as reports flooded in of simultaneous attacks across their territory. Their supply lines were severed, their communications disrupted, and their industrial capacity systematically destroyed. This was not the limited, honorable warfare they understood. This was something primal and terrifying. Human forces employed tactics that had never been seen in galactic warfare. They used electronic warfare to turn Kethvar automated systems against their own forces. They broadcast propaganda directly to Kethvar civilian populations, explaining exactly why their military was being destroyed and promising that the attacks would continue until justice was achieved. The Kethvar discovery that humans could coordinate attacks across such vast distances simultaneously shocked military experts throughout the galaxy. Most species required weeks or months to plan operations involving multiple star systems. Humans had organized hundreds of simultaneous strikes while appearing to do nothing at all. Industrial facilities that had taken decades to build were reduced to scrap metal in hours. Mining operations that supplied raw materials to entire sectors were left as empty craters. The Kethvar war machine, which had seemed so powerful when it destroyed the sanctuary, began to collapse under the systematic destruction of everything that supported it. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, demanding that humanity cease what they called an unprecedented and excessive assault. The council members had never seen warfare conducted on such a scale or with such coordination. They feared that if humans could do this to the Kethvar, no species in the galaxy was truly safe. Humanity's response was delivered by President Nam Suk in a brief, cold message that would be remembered for generations. The Galactic Council failed to protect 50,000 innocent children under its supposed protection. You may negotiate with the ashes of our children, but you will not negotiate with us until justice is complete. Other alien races watched the destruction of Kethvar territory with growing fear and understanding. They had spent centuries believing that human restraint in warfare was due to weakness or lack of capability. Now they realized that humanity had simply chosen not to show their true potential for organized violence. That choice had been revoked the moment the sanctuary was destroyed. The galaxy would never be the same. General Vex Hun stared at the tactical display in his command bunker deep beneath the surface of Kethvar Prime. Red warning lights blinked across the holographic map of their territory, each one representing another facility, another world, another piece of their civilization that had fallen to the relentless human assault. In just 3 months, the mighty Kethvar Confederation had been reduced to scattered remnants fighting for survival. "General," his communications officer called out, her voice shaking with fear. "We've lost contact with the 4th Fleet. The humans hit their supply base at Sector 9. Without fuel and ammunition, they're sitting helpless in space." Vex Hun closed his eyes and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The attack on the human sanctuary was supposed to be a demonstration of strength, a warning to humanity to stay within their borders and stop expanding into Kethvar territory. Instead, it had unleashed something that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. "Sir, incoming priority message from High Command," another officer announced. The holographic image of Supreme Commander Kethmar appeared, but he looked nothing like the proud military leader who had ordered the sanctuary's destruction. His uniform was torn, his face covered in dust and burns. Behind him, explosions could be seen through the windows of what had once been the most secure military facility in Kethvar space. "Vex Hun," Kethmar said, his voice filled with desperation. "Our worlds are burning. The humans don't fight like any species we've ever encountered. They don't stop. They don't negotiate. They don't even pause to claim territory. They just destroy everything and move on to the next target." The transmission was interrupted by another explosion, and Kethmar's image flickered and died. That was the last communication Vex Hun would ever receive from High Command. The humans had done something that military experts across the galaxy said was impossible. They had coordinated simultaneous attacks across hundreds of star systems, striking at every piece of infrastructure that kept Kethvar civilization running. Food production facilities, power plants, communication networks, transportation hubs, mining operations and manufacturing centers had all been systematically destroyed. But it wasn't just the scale of the attacks that terrified the Kethvar. It was the complete absence of traditional military honor. Human forces didn't issue challenges or demand single combat between champions. They didn't capture territory and hold it. They simply appeared, destroyed everything of value, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Lieutenant Zorketh, one of Vexhun's intelligence officers, had been studying human tactics throughout the war. "General," he said, reading from his latest report, "I think I understand what they're doing. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to make us cease to exist as a functioning society." The young officer pulled up data from dozens of human attacks. "Look at their target selection. They don't care about military glory or strategic positions. They attack whatever keeps our civilization running. Without supplies, without communication, without industry, our military becomes irrelevant." Vexhun nodded grimly. The humans had turned warfare into something cold and systematic, like a machine designed to dismantle an entire species. There was no passion in it, no anger, just methodical destruction carried out with terrifying efficiency. Reports continued to flood in from across Kethvar territory. Admiral Choi Jun's fleet had appeared at the edge of the Kethvar Prime system, the heart of their civilization and the place where the attack on the sanctuary had been planned. This was to be the final battle, the last chance for the Kethvar to prove they could stand against humanity's new way of war. Captain Lim Hua commanded the siege forces that began systematically dismantling the planet's orbital defenses. The massive space stations and weapon platforms that had protected Kethvar Prime for centuries were destroyed one by one with surgical precision. There was no dramatic space battle, no glorious clash of fleets. The humans simply identified each defensive position and eliminated it with overwhelming firepower. The planetary shield generators were the next targets. These enormous installations had been built to protect the planet from any conceivable attack, but they had been designed to repel traditional military assaults. The humans bypassed them entirely, sending small strike teams to destroy the power stations that fed them energy. As the shields flickered and died, Vexhun realized that his world was completely defenseless. The orbital platforms that should have protected them were floating debris. The fleets that should have driven off the attackers had been destroyed or scattered weeks ago. The proud Kethvar military, which had seemed so strong when it murdered defenseless children, had proven helpless against an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. Admiral Choi Jun's voice came through the communication system, broadcast to every Kethvar receiver on the planet. "Surrender and your civilians will be spared. You have 1 hour to respond." The emergency council of Kethvar leaders huddled in their bunker, trying to decide between death and dishonor. "And if we refuse?" asked Chancellor Morketh, the voice of their desperate civilization. The response came not from Choi Jun but from Major Jang Ho, whose cold voice carried no trace of emotion. "Then you'll join the children you murdered." The threat was not empty. In the months of warfare, the humans had demonstrated that they would carry out exactly what they promised. The Kethvar had started this war by killing innocents. Now they faced the complete destruction of everything they had built over thousands of years. Within the hour, the surrender came. The proud Kethvar Confederation, which had ruled dozens of star systems and commanded the fear of many alien races, formally capitulated to humanity. Their military was disbanded, their weapons confiscated, and their leaders put on trial for crimes against children. Across the galaxy, alien diplomats watched in stunned silence as they realized how completely they had misunderstood human nature. For centuries, humanity had been the voice of reason in galactic politics, advocating for peaceful solutions and diplomatic compromise. They had seemed weak, sentimental, too concerned with protecting civilians to be effective warriors. Now the truth was clear. Humanity's restraint had never been weakness. It had been a choice. And that choice had been revoked forever. Admiral Choi Jun stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the burning remains of Kethvar Prime through the reinforced viewing ports. The planet that had once been the center of a mighty confederation was now a broken world. Smoke rose from destroyed military installations while civilian areas remained largely untouched. The human fleet had demonstrated surgical precision in its final assault, targeting only those facilities directly connected to the military leadership that had ordered the sanctuary's destruction. In the conference room behind him, heated arguments filled the air. Colonel Kong Seo paced back and forth, his face red with anger and grief. He had lost his nephew in the sanctuary attack, a bright 8-year-old boy who had dreamed of becoming a starship engineer. The pain of that loss burned in his eyes as he spoke. "Admiral, we have them completely defeated," Kang Seo said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Their military is destroyed, their infrastructure is in ruins, their government has surrendered unconditionally. This is our chance to make sure they never threaten human children again. We should finish what they started." Across the table, Dr. Wonyu shook her head sadly. She had served as a counselor at the sanctuary for 5 years before transferring to military medical service. She knew many of the children who had died by name, had helped them through nightmares and fears, had watched them grow and learn and hope for better futures. "Colonel, I understand your anger," Wonyu said quietly. "I feel it too. But if we become like them, if we murder their civilians as they murdered our children, then we lose something essential about what makes us human. The children we lost were innocent. The HFY civilians down there are also innocent." The debate continued for hours. Other officers presented arguments on both sides. Some wanted complete destruction of the HFY species as punishment for their crimes. Others argued for mercy and rehabilitation. The decision ultimately rested with Admiral Choi Jun, the man who had led humanity's campaign of total war. Choi Jun thought about the children he had never met but had fought to avenge. He remembered Lee Hyun's final transmission, the terror in the commander's voice as he realized what was happening. He thought about the letters from families across human space, parents and siblings and friends who would never again receive drawings and messages from the sanctuary. "The children would want us to be better than our enemies," Choi finally decided. "We will spare the HFY civilian population. But they will live with the consequences of their leaders' choices for generations to come." The Admiral's decision was transmitted to all human forces in the system. The bombardment ceased, and humanitarian aid ships moved in to provide medical assistance and basic supplies to HFY civilians. But the message that followed would reshape galactic politics forever. Choi Jun activated the galaxy-wide communication network, sending his words to every inhabited world in known space. Representatives from dozens of alien species listened as the human admiral spoke with cold determination. "Let this serve as eternal warning to every species in the galaxy," he said, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's newfound resolve. "Any species that targets human civilians will face total war without mercy or quarter. We tried peace for centuries. We followed your rules, respected your treaties, and protected the innocent even when our enemies did not. You taught us the limitations of such restraint." The broadcast continued with detailed footage of the HFY campaign. Alien military analysts watched in horrified fascination as human forces demonstrated capabilities that no one had suspected. The systematic destruction of an entire civilization's infrastructure in mere months shocked even the most warlike species. "We are not conquerors," Choi's message concluded. "We do not seek to rule over other species or expand our territory through force. But we will never again allow the innocent to suffer while we debate proper responses. This is the new reality that the HFY has created." Captain No Jin received orders to oversee the construction of humanity's most important monument. The memorial for the lost children would not be built in human space, where only humans would see it. Instead, it would be constructed at the former location of the Terran Children's Sanctuary, in neutral space where it would serve as humanity's new embassy to the galaxy. The memorial was unlike any structure ever built. At its center stood a vast hall containing 50,000 individual memory crystals, each one glowing softly with the recorded voice and image of a child who had died in the attack. Visitors could walk among these lights, hearing the laughter and dreams of the innocents whose deaths had changed the galaxy forever. Surrounding the central hall were exhibits showing the complete history of the sanctuary and its destruction. The displays included not just the attack itself, but the aftermath, the total war campaign that had reduced the mighty HFY Confederation to a collection of refugee camps and occupied worlds. Within weeks of its completion, the memorial began receiving visitors from across the galaxy. Alien diplomats came not out of respect or sympathy, but out of fear. They needed to understand what humanity had become, to see for themselves the price of underestimating human resolve. Ambassador Veltar of the Rigelian Collective stood in the memorial's central hall, listening to a recording of 9-year-old Tommy Chin singing a song about flying among the stars. The Rigelian's multiple eyes watered as he realized that these had been real children, not military targets or strategic assets, but young beings full of hope and dreams. "We never understood," Veltar whispered to his aide. "We thought their protection of civilians was weakness, that their mercy was a limitation. We never realized it was a choice they could revoke." Other species sent their own delegations, each coming away with the same terrible understanding. Humanity's previous restraint in warfare had not been due to inability or weakness. It had been a deliberate decision to limit their own destructive potential. That decision had been permanently revoked. The galaxy settled into a new kind of peace, one built not on mutual respect or shared ideals, but on the certain knowledge of what would happen to anyone who threatened human civilians. Trade continued, diplomatic relations were maintained, and conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than force. But everyone understood the new rules. Humanity had transformed from the galaxy's peacemakers into its ultimate enforcers, and they would never forget what they were capable of when their families were threatened.